These are my photographs, except the ones that I'm in. Photographs that I took.
All right. I'm really glad to have folks on the call today. Oops.
What happened? That's not right.
I'm still playing something.
Sorry about that.
There we go. There we go. All right. I'm really glad to have folks on the call tonight. We are midst Women's History Month, and that's something we wanted to mark here in the show in the time of Pesach. And we have somebody in the community who was an ideal presenter. We're very glad to have Meryl Frank with us. Meryl was, first of all, she was mayor of the center of the world, the capital of the Western Hemisphere, Highland Park, New Jersey, for 10 years, and she has been involved in feminist issues and politics. And she served in the Obama administration. She served as the ambassador, the United States' ambassador to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And she has been privileged in that capacity, and then subsequently to that in nonprofit work, to travel around the developing world to see lots of different cases and places of women's empowerment. So we were very happy to have Meryl come on the call tonight and to tell us about some of the things that she's learned and experienced and her reflections, and to talk with her. And if that all weren't enough, she's also writing a book about some of her own family's history in surviving the Shoah in Vilna. And so I'm really happy to have Meryl Frank with us. And I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to mute everybody else. I think everyone else is muted. So I'll just mute myself, and then you can talk.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Meryl Frank.
Actually, I'm going to do something even better than that.
What's that?
Real quick, one more thing. There you go.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Meryl Frank. I'm a member at Ansche Chesed for about 6 or 7 years now. But our family's been members at Ansche Chesed since the shul was built, actually. My husband's grandparents and great-grandparents were members there, and their names are etched in the brass on the walls, and there's windows dedicated to family members. And his parents were married there in 1947. And when the family no longer lived in New York City, they still continued to pay dues until just about the time that my husband and I joined. And when we decided to move to New York, our choice of a shul was naturally Ansche Chesed, and we got a bonus of a great and inspiring rabbi. And I know rabbis very well. My community had no less than 33 of them. So now with our kids who also love Ansche Chesed, and my new grandson who lives in Harlem, we're going to have 6 generations there. I was asked to speak to you this month of Women's History Month, a little bit about women's leadership and the work that I've done. As the rabbi mentioned, I was mayor of Highland Park for 10 years and then appointed by President Obama as ambassador to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And now I'm a consultant. I'm a consultant on 2 women leaders, and my firm is called Makeda Global. Rabbi, I have a quiz for you. Let's see how much Bible you know. So I was looking for this name for
Not
a
that much, I
consulting
don't know.
firm
Yeah.
that reflected a strong woman that was cross-cultural, a woman who didn't gain her power as a sister or a wife or a lover, so not Cleopatra or Catherine the Great. So Rabbi, who is Makeda?
She is the source of the name of a women's empowerment consulting group in the 21st century. That's
Oh,
all I got.
really?
That's all I got. No
Okay,
idea.
I'm going to give you a hint.
Okay.
She came to him to prove him with hard questions. He gave her all that she desired, whatever she asked.
Is that Malkat
Gave
Sheva?
her-
Is that the Queen of Sheba?
Yes,
No, I did not. Malkat Sheva. Did not know that. Okay.
yes. The Queen of Sheba is obviously in Jewish tradition, and Makeda is the Ethiopian Christian and the Rastafarian name for her, and it's Belkis in the Muslim tradition. See, so I caught you on something. So Makeda,
Always happy to learn stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
at Makeda, we focus on women's leadership training, and it's not just the rah-rah women can do anything sort of thing, but it's real life skills, public speaking, which for women around the world is the #2 fear. It follows death. So this is very, very important that women are able to speak in front of people. So we focus on verbal and nonverbal communication and strategic planning and campaigning, all of the skills that you need to be a successful leader.
You just went silent.
Well, I didn't go silent. This is the sort of work that I do.
Okay,
What
gotcha.
I do is I teach women to speak out, to project their voice. And this is, the nonverbal communication is so very, very important for women. What we do is we talk with them about their posture. We talk with them about their voice. What happens with women is their voice tends to go up very high when they get nervous and they speak really fast and nobody can hear them. And so we work with them on finding their own voice, finding it deeper down, slower, because if they can't communicate, it just doesn't matter. And when I go to them and basically say, look, I'm a privileged American woman, and my experience and my expertise is probably not always applicable. So I start by saying, look, I'm not here to solve your problems. I'll tell you what you need. I'm not here to tell you what to do. They know their issues better than I ever will. They know the wisdom in their culture better than I ever will. And there's no substitute for that. But what I can do is tell them what I've learned and the things that are universal for women. And what I've learned is our nonverbal communication is key. The first thing that I think of, my kids gave it to me, is the mother's look. You probably all know it. Your mother looks at you and you know you're in big trouble. That sort of, it is universal. Everyone in the world knows exactly what that is when I mention it. The other universal thing is a smile, nonverbal communication. And this is universal. We know from teaching our babies. Although in some places like Afghanistan, it's dangerous because a smile is considered a flirt. And another thing that's universal is looking up to grab a word, a thought. We go like this. Now, if your language is, for example, you're speaking in English and it's not your first language, it's acceptable to do that in a conversation. But if it is your first language, you look unsure. Another is submissive posture, and that's universal. If we sit down like this, think of a dog crouching in fear, and people do the same thing. And a straight, elegant posture is a signal of strength. And so what I do is I share with the experiences of other women all around the world, and we make strategic plans to help them meet their goals, and I work with them to find their confidence and the things that they need to overcome their fears and communicate their plans and accomplish their goals. And when our time together is over, they've learned real skills that they can take home with them. They learn to speak with confidence, and they have some tricks of the trade. You know, I consider it a success if they've mastered one of the things. One of the things, for example, I give them is very often when women talk, they will stand up and they'll touch their bodies and they don't know what to do with their hands. And so I throw them a pen and say, just hold this. And it's like an anchor. They then aren't moving their hands all over the place. I had one woman in Cambodia say, but I can't write. I said, oh, forget it, doesn't matter, just hold the pen. And so now it's called the magic pen. The women came up with that. And you know what, it works. But honestly, I've learned more than I give them. And probably the best way to show you is to introduce to you some of these amazing women. And it was very hard to pick from this whole crowd. They are extraordinary. All of them became leaders despite the odds, and because they became angry about some issue. And they've all taken hits from a male-dominated society, but they've all enriched their communities and they've survived. So I'm going to show you a picture of each one of them. Can you see that? Wait a minute. Let me share that with you.
Can't see it. Oh, there we go.
Wrong one. One minute. Let me get the right one. Just a minute. I had this right. Well, I think, let me see. Okay. Okay, this is Hakima El Haiti. And you've probably never heard of her, but she has changed your life. And she's changed the lives of your children and theirs. And Hakima is arguably the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. When we met, she was the owner of an environmental engineering firm that covered North Africa and Middle East. And this is an accomplishment on her own. She was the first firm of its kind. Hakima came from a traditional Moroccan family. Her mother was married at 14 and to her father, who was 36. And she had 9 sons and a daughter, Hakima. And Hakima too was in an arranged marriage. She had 3 girls. She's from Fez. She then divorced and got 2 PhDs in engineering and started her own company. When we met, she was interested in moving into politics, but elected politics wasn't her thing. And so the 2 of us got together and we actually, I worked with her. And then we created an organization called Connecting Group that helped women who were interested in appointed office. Hakima eventually became the Minister of Environment for the Kingdom of Morocco. And through that, the vice president of the Paris Climate Conference, she was the one that negotiated the agreements. And then the president of the International Climate Conference in Morocco, where they negotiated the implementation of the agreements. And now she's president of Liberal International, which is an organization of about 130 liberal and social democratic organizations all over the world. This is a woman who, despite the odds, despite growing up in the sort of family that she did, she was able to make a difference. And she continues to do this. She's an extraordinary woman. The next woman is Mia Sarr. I won't go into her last name. Okay. Mia Sarr was the first Bedouin woman member of parliament in Jordan, and she's brilliant. She's called the Desert Princess, and I accompanied her. And what I would do is I would accompany all of the women members of parliament to their constituencies all across Jordan. And she lived in North Badia, which the highway signs there say Saudi, Syria, Iraq. And it's a barren land. I met with 13 tribal chiefs. And when we were meeting, I asked them, why support Mia Sarr? How did she get you to support them? And they said that they thought that they would be shamed and humiliated to support a woman. And Mia Sarr said to them, well, what have the men done for you? And she then explained to them how she could win this and what she could do for the community. And believe it or not, they ended up supporting her and they created a machine. Another chief said, well, we had already committed to someone. They vote, tribes vote as a whole. Think of a union, okay? They all vote together. They went and they supported her as well. So we had dinner on the floor, people are in costume, their traditional costume. We had dinner with the men, which is unusual. And then I was very lucky to be able to go in with the women. And what they do is take dinner in, the leftovers, and we had a feast with the women. I asked Mia Sarr, why her? What was different? Why did they accept her? And she said, because my grandfather gave me the red coat. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, he gave me the red coat. He gave everyone else a brown coat. And that's when I realized that he gave her the blessing. I was living in the Bible. This was Joseph and the many-colored coat. She was the blessed child. He gave her the special coat. On a subsequent visit to Jordan, Mia Sarr, still in the parliament, and a friend of hers had been killed in an honor killing. Apparently, her brother and 7 others came and killed her because she had been writing on Facebook. He was given, I believe, 3 months in prison, and Mia Sarr was horrified by this, ready to leave parliament because the laws, in Jordan, the laws are very different. There is civil law and there's Sharia law. In the past, you had to have training in civil law in order to be a Sharia judge, but no longer. Things are not going in a direction that we would think is progressive. And so she was going to leave, but I was able to convince her to stay and to keep fighting. This is a strong woman. This is against all odds. She is absolutely remarkable. The next is Nancy Sitima. Now, Nancy is a different kind of leader, but a leader nonetheless. She's a woman from the village called Gongtown in Kenya. And she started an organization called the Forum for Women in Development, Democracy, and Justice. And this is a grassroots organization that deals with Maasai women. And she deals with women, she's a very interesting idea. She deals with women who are the cutters. Do you know what the cutters are? The ones that do the female genital mutilization. That they say we wouldn't hurt our children, we cut, we don't mutilate. But she explained to me that these women have power in their communities because of what they do. And it's her thinking that by giving them other power, that they may release some of the power for what the source of their power is otherwise. What she's trying to do is not just say, don't do this, this is a bad tradition, but try to find another way for women to retain their power. She also works with women who have run away because they didn't want to be cut. And that's another whole interesting story. But she works with them. She helps women find their voice. She advocates for them. And she also helps them find some economic independence. Nancy herself lost her husband when she was 9 months pregnant. Both of her parents died of AIDS. Her sister died of AIDS. She adopted her children. And she still had the strength to work in her community. An amazing woman. When I met her at a conference in Nairobi, she invited me to conduct a leadership training with the women in rural Kenya, with the Maasai women and basket weavers and widows. And it was beautiful. My payment was 13 eggs, which I couldn't take on the plane with me, unfortunately. She invited me to stay at her home, and this is a home with no running water, sporadic electricity, and she was shocked when I agreed. She killed a chicken in my honor. You know, rich people kill a lamb, but poor people will kill a chicken. And she asked me to say grace, and I explained to her that I was a Jew, in which she liked me to say the blessing in Hebrew. And she screamed, "You're a Jew!" I said, "Yes." She said, "Please say the blessing. I once read a book about a Jew girl, and she gave me hope." She's a beautiful woman. The next is, Nasreen Armanet. She is a young woman that I met when she was a councilwoman for Vilnius, in Vilnius. I met her in Georgia at a women's conference, and she just struck me as being extraordinary. I told her that my family was from Vilna and Jewish, and she immediately said, "We must acknowledge that our part as ethnic Lithuanians in the destruction of the Jewish community," which is so unusual. You know, usually you speak to Lithuanians, they want nothing to do with this. But she was very sure that they had to acknowledge their part. When I later returned to Lithuania for another organization, and I was doing trainings with Belarusian women, she asked me to do some trainings with some of her compatriots. And she had been running for parliament by then. And I worked with her to start her own political party, which won, it's called the Freedom Party, which won 11 seats in parliament. She is now, as a member of parliament and also the Minister of the Economy. She also continued to advocate for the Jewish community, and sort of as a matter of principle, because believe me, that as a politician, there's no constituency there. You know, you're not making anybody happy, you're just making people pissed off. Because, for example, there's this plaque that was going up in Vilnius, and it honored a Lithuanian who was also a hero to them, but who had murdered Jews. She stood up with the only other member of parliament, who happened to be the only Jewish member of parliament, Emmanuel Zagaras, to protest the placement of this plaque. There's no political calculation here, but she is driven by this belief in democracy and a commitment to social justice. And I think she's somebody we ought to follow. Next is Musa Kua. Musa is just an amazing woman. She is the leader of the opposition party that promotes democracy in Cambodia. Cambodia, if you don't know, is now ruled by former Khmer Rouge. She lost both of her parents during that period, during the Khmer Rouge period. And she works with this democracy party, as I said, and the party was recently outlawed and she was accused of treason. I spent some time with her in Phnom Penh and in the rural Battambang province. We were working with women who were running for office. And at one stop, I distinctly remember this, she said, "They say they're going to kill me, but I'm still here and I'm not afraid." And I'm looking around like, well, it was scary. But this is a woman who has extraordinary strength and is working for her country. And she now lives in exile, but despite that, she's planning on returning home. And I recently read that she was arrested in Myanmar. So I'm not really sure what's going on with her now. And finally, this is Nasreen Rafik. Nasreen and I worked together over the course of several years in Afghanistan, and she was an advocate for women there. Everyone trusted Nasreen. She was forced into marriage in order to avoid a Taliban commander who wanted her. She was beaten and her arms were broken by the Taliban just for removing her burqa to breathe on a very hot day. And when change came to Afghanistan, she became this leading advocate for women and landed a job with USAID. And she was working in Kabul, and she traveled to the most remote and dangerous provinces to support women. And together with Nasreen, we worked with women who were running for office, and later with women who were in the Senate, who were members of Senate. And each one of them has a unique and powerful story to tell. Several years ago, I received a frantic call from Nasreen, and she and her family were threatened. The Taliban was gaining strength, and she was threatened almost daily, and she was begging me for help. And after 3 years, we were finally able to get her out of Kabul to the United States. She lived with us. And we're all very happy that she's safe. Her family is still being threatened, and things there are not very good right now. But in the United States, here's a powerful woman who has really no voice here. She has no calling. In Afghanistan, she was this respected woman, this powerhouse, a real advocate. But in the United States, it's her second language. She doesn't write very well in English. And so she volunteers with refugees, and she hasn't been able to find her place. But you can imagine what it must be like going somewhere and having been a leader and now being lost. But she's still a leader, and we're going to find a way for her to come back. Nasreen deserves it. So these are just some examples of the women that I've worked with. And, you know, it's been an honor to be with them and to share experiences. But I wanted to add something else here, and that's that these women not only enriched my life as a woman, and I'm absolutely honored to have worked with them. I hope that I gave them something also. But they've enriched my life as a Jew, and I think that that's relevant for tonight. You know, I've worked in many places where my Jewish identity, you know, I've never lied, but I don't volunteer it. In Afghanistan, obviously it's dangerous, but in most countries, it's not about the danger, but rather women who work with me could be accused of working with an Israeli spy. And just like here, there, your opposition will use anything. And so that I don't like to put them, I don't want to put them in a position where it can hurt them. But the work with the women all around the world has given me a perspective as a Jew that is, I think, unique, a unique perspective on the Bible. And I don't read Hebrew. I don't have a real formal Jewish education. And in Jeremy's Wednesday night class, I am completely lost. But I love learning, and I love his Parsha talks and his sermons. And what I've learned is that I've had some unique experiences, and I've seen firsthand much of what happens in the Bible. You know, I've welcomed women as they've come into the refugee camp carrying kids on their backs, and their feet, I know what their feet look like after wandering in the desert and passing through rivers with crocodiles. And, you know, these women say that they live in the diaspora and they're longing for their homeland. And even their children that have never seen their homeland are longing for it. I've attended ritual sacrifices, and I've seen a lamb slaughtered to celebrate the birth of a son. I know that this is an extraordinarily powerful experience, this moment between life and death, and the sound that the animal makes, this primal energy that the ceremony sends out. It's something that is, we read about it, but it's very hard to quite get how powerful this is. And I've wandered in Wadi Musa, which is the Valley of Moses, and there felt this bone-chilling cold. And I know about the intense importance of the tribes and the incredible hospitality of desert people and the loneliness of the shepherd. And I also know about the taste of camel milk. And I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with second and third wives. And sometimes you understand how this makes sense. You know, the women in parliament often can do this because there are other wives taking care of their husbands and their families. So it's a way of life that's still very much alive. And believe me, in some cases there's jealousy, but in others, look, if you're 14 and you marry a 40-year-old man, you don't care if there's other wives. You know, let them take care of him. I also know now what it's like to be part of a family with many wives, and how the children often feel that they get comfort from so many people. And I've learned from them what it means to be the chosen child, as I mentioned earlier. And I've been lucky enough to attend a mass circumcision ceremony, to see the mothers standing there with their boys. They get a sack of sugar, and I, as the honored guest, got to hold the babies with their little penises. And when I would cross into Israel from Jordan, I learned that the women on each side of the river saw the others as monsters. I've spent time with women who are barren. They still have this word, who are barren, and others that live a pastoral life. And I've been in traditional patriarchal cultures, but also in matriarchal cultures. You may not know this, but in Malawi, in the north, it's patriarchal. In the south, it's matriarchal. And I've also seen what it means to live beneath a veil, to have no power, to not be counted as a witness, to be a victim of an honor crime, or to be or to own a slave. But the greatest lesson I've learned from them is that the women elders, they're often called the mothers, the matriarchs, these are great leaders. And their names are rarely recorded. We don't know very much about them. They're often forgotten, just as they are in our Bible. But these women, for the first time in thousands of years, their life is changing. And it's changing at this unimaginable pace and moving from tribal society to the highest offices. These women are lifting their veils. They're working in rice paddies, but they have smartphones. And women are balancing their tradition with their history and the opportunities that allow change. And in many ways, we're living at this last moment in history when people did as they did thousands of years ago. And for women, that's probably a good thing. But I can tell you this, in biblical times as now, women are leaders, and they've always been leaders. They just haven't always been recognized. So thank you. I hope that I was able to give you a little bit of insight into the work that I've done and the women that I've had the great honor to work with. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
That was totally amazing. Amazing stories and amazing experiences. I myself have never had camel's milk, and don't anticipate that I will.
Have you ever been at a mass circumcision with 100 babies?
We just read about it in the Haftarah from the first day of Passover. It was mass circumcision.
It's amazing. It's a big party. And I got to hold the babies and take pictures, and they give each woman a sack of sugar.
I have also never, we were talking with a friend of mine today about, who is a vegan, about, the desanitized way in which we purchase meat. The meat comes obviously in a plastic bag, right? No, I've never, but I've never been to what was a korban, what was much of history has been a ritual slaughtering of animals for food. So those are amazing experiences. We do have, a bunch of people here who I'm sure also have questions. I'm going to invite you guys to use either the chat function or the raise hand function if anybody wants to say one, and I'll call on people and selectively unmute you. Anybody?
Yeah, I've got one, Jeremy.
Okay.
Hi, Meryl. How are you?
Hi.
Very interesting presentation. Let me ask you a question. Can you relate maybe some of the work you did with the commission when you were appointed as the ambassador, U.S. ambassador of the Women's Status Commission, and tell us a little bit about that and some of your experiences on the commission?
Okay, well, I was actually very lucky. I was appointed early in Obama's term, and because of that, when I was at the UN, I was able to announce that we were funding population clinics again. Do you remember the gag rule? For those of you who don't know, under Bush, they had stopped funding any organization that even mentioned abortion, and that meant organizations that dealt with women's health, children's health. And I was told when I went to the UN that I would be hissed at. Under the Bush administration, we weren't very well liked, certainly on women's issues. But I got there and was able to announce this and got a standing ovation. So I was very pleased. It was an interesting experience because it was in some ways a new generation. The women there were public members also, had been the women who fought the fight. And I wanted to have meetings we had meetings with NGOs, hundreds of them, and I wanted to invite the Right to Life women. And the women on my board didn't want them. And the staff even said they never invited us. And I said, no, we have to invite them. And at this meeting, it was very interesting because one of the members started talking about when life begins. One of the women, a pro-choice woman, they started arguing with somebody in the audience, and I just stopped it and said, look, are there things we can all agree on? We have different worldviews, but how do we feel about rape as a weapon of war? How do we feel about domestic violence? Can we agree on these things? And for the first time in my life, I had Right to Life women coming up and hugging me, which was very odd. But it was a different sort of approach. And I think that was very important, that we were trying to include all women on issues that we can all agree on. Another thing that was very interesting there was that different countries come and they want to meet with you. The representative from Sierra Leone came. This was shortly after, well, not so shortly after the war in Sierra Leone. And he was the Minister of Health, I believe, a gynecologist. And he said, we have 30 nurse midwives and 5 obstetricians for a population of 6 million. And I was expecting him to say, we need help with practitioners. And what he said was, we need psychologists and social workers, which was fascinating. You know, they really understood that they weren't going to heal without healing here. And I think that we understand this from our own experience from the Holocaust, that so much of it, the spiritual resistance, that what people needed was to be able to heal the trauma, and then they could heal other parts of their lives. And finally, I'll end with one. I've loads of stories, but I don't want to take it all up with this. And that is, it was the 15th anniversary of the Beijing conference. That is when Hillary said women's rights are human rights. And so they had a representative from each one of the hemispheres speak, well, from 5 hemispheres, and I was representing North America. And 4 of them were men, talking about all of the progress that's been made since in the 15 years. And I got up and, you know, you're not allowed to say anything that isn't approved because it could cause an international incident. So everything is approved by the State Department and the White House. You don't change anything. But I said to the woman next to me that I was going to say something. And she said, you can't. I said, no, I'm going to say something. And I got up and I said that I'm honored to be here on behalf of North America, but I'm doubly honored to be here as the only woman, and went like this, which I probably shouldn't have done. But I got a thumbs up from the Consul General and another standing ovation. So those are my simple stories, but I'll tell you more another time.
Any other questions? Please signify. Marge, unmute yourself.
I'm curious as to what you found as the greatest challenges in your job as mayor.
Oh. Well, I was mayor of a community that's about 40% Jewish. That's a big challenge. University and Jews, it's like everybody knows everything. And really an enormous challenge. But honestly, I think that one of the challenging things was to give people a belief in something. Everyone is very cynical. And to give them, to help them know that what we were doing, we were listening, that we had an ability to listen, we would change our minds, and that's a good thing, that's not flip-flopping, but that, that there are people, that being a politician is an honorable thing. You know, we sacrifice a lot of time with our families. We work very hard to figure things out, not all of us, obviously, but that it is possible to work in a community for the good of the community. And, you know, that is really, really difficult, to get people to believe that you mean what you say. And luckily, at 10 years when I left, I said, look, I did everything I said I was going to do. And the things that I didn't do, I explained to you why I couldn't. But giving them faith and belief in the system, that's really, really hard. And snow removal, of course.
Thank you.
I have a question. I wanted to thank you also just for telling us all about your experiences with women on the international scene and some of the terrible struggles that they face. Very, very helpful to hear that. So I'd like, if you would come back to sort of this country and what you think are the principal issues facing women in this country. If you had to select, if you had to prioritize in your mind, especially given your experience internationally, what would they be? what would those issues be?
Well, I have a few things, and they may surprise you. You know, I spoke a little bit about honor crimes, and I'm sorry, about honor crimes, and I realized while working there that it's across the room. I'm sorry about that. I realized while working there that we are not so great on this either. You know, we have very high rates of domestic violence and death due to domestic violence in the United States, but we don't keep records. We don't say that that was the cause. And I would bet that if we did keep records, we would have nothing to be so proud about. That is in fact an honor crime. And so that's one thing. The other that may also surprise you, that I think is an enormous problem in the United States, is the maternal and child death rate. There is no reason why we should have the sort of rates that are in undeveloped countries. And in inner cities in the United States, our numbers are horrible. And these are things that we can do to support the lives of women and their children that we're just not doing. And so those are two issues that I think people think of other countries having to deal with. But in fact, if you look here, we have enormous problems to deal with.
Fran Gordon, you were going to go next.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to make the coffee date for when I come back to New York and we can all hang out.
Okay.
Fabulous. So in your work with Israeli women, which I assume that you said you cross over and they see each other as monsters, any bridge building that you've seen, any reasons for hope that the women in the region can really, change the narrative and maybe hope?
You know, I was thrilled to be able to work at the Arava Institute. Do you know the Arava? It's amazing. It's an institute that deals with the environment, and they have students live there that are from Israel and Jordan and Canada and the United States. And those discussions were very, very interesting. And I think, the environment has no borders, and so they can deal with these things. Now, when I was in Jordan, I also met with some students that had been at the Arava Institute. They asked me not to tell anyone. It was one of the young women who went to the Arava Institute and loved it, was in hiding because she had taken her veil off and her family had threatened to throw acid at her. And the other one, her parents knew and they were very supportive, but she couldn't tell anyone. So we didn't say how we knew each other. So are there possibilities? It's a bigger question than I can answer, but from working with women, one of the women in the pictures is a Palestinian woman. And, I think that the only hope they have is through women. We have issues that are universal, and, these are tough questions, but
I can't remember her name with the red coat, but when she said, and one of the men brought you, that's just a great story.
Exactly. But, working in Jordan, it's interesting. They didn't know I was Jewish, obviously. And what I do is I show them what good posters are, for example, a campaign poster. And there was one that somebody showed me, and I said, yes, this is very, usually women's, maybe their face isn't shown, or else they'll have a very, old-fashioned sort of portrait. But this one guy had this great poster. It was an Israeli flag burning, and it said, "Jihad or be humiliated." Now, the reason I say it's great is you know exactly where he stands. It was emotional, it got you drawn in. But I mean, this is the way that it is. And very often they would speak about Israel, and I would never, the only thing that I ever said to anyone is, it's more complicated than that. And I never had someone disagree with me. They'd always say, yes, you're right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll take one, which is a kind of a big and open-ended question. Since there are two stories in what you presented having to do with genital cutting, one of which we Jews love, and one of which strikes us Americans as just the worst brutality. I'm just interested to any reflections that you have about like the modes of cultural imperialism. It's a hard thing for me as an American to want to say, you know, by the way, seriously, you know, native cultures or tribal cultures, you're wrong about this thing. That's not a nice thing to say. That's a very you know, arrogant Westerner kind of thing to say. And there is this practice which I think is absolutely horrifying. And how do you, as
But
a
at the same
Westerner,
time, you think that ours is wonderful.
at the same time, I think ours is wonderful. And of course, I know that there's absolutely no relationship between male genital cutting and female genital cutting. That's totally different, of course, except it's maybe not totally different. And so I just am interested in your reflections on like the times when you either felt or maybe somebody said to you that you were being a cultural imperialist, and how does it work?
Well, I think coming to this as a Jew informs me in a very important way. For example, the mass circumcision. I turned to my friend and I said, "You are so lucky you brought a Jew to this, because if you had brought like a regular American, they would think you guys are nuts." But to me, it was a big bris, you know, a big party. But in the case of cutting, you know, I tried to approach it with respect and try to understand. Now, obviously, this is a health issue. You know, there's a very high rate of infection. It's painful. It's painful for a life of a woman very often. And by the way, we were working with men. I was working with Film Aid then, and we did a film on adult male circumcision because it's so important there. With Maasai, I mean, this traditional people, was very interesting. But I tried to approach it with respect and understanding, because I understand when people approach me about, you know, our own ceremonies, that it's barbaric. But come to it as, I think that what Nancy Sitima was doing is very interesting, talking about power and how it's associated with power. If women don't have any other power, any other way of exerting their power, then, and this is the only way, then why would they give that up? What she was trying to do is find another way for them to express themselves. And because it wasn't working with just people coming in saying, "Don't do this, you're bad." Just as with us, it wouldn't work just people saying we're bad. But, and also the health issues are really important. So getting involved in cleaner, you know, even just childbirth. You know, I was talking about childbirth in the United States. 200,000 women die a year of pregnancy and childbirth in sub-Saharan Africa. Can you imagine if we had a war where 200,000 people died and nobody says anything? And most of it is preventable. So when you come to cutting, yeah, it's really important. And these are health issues. These fall very much in line with all the other women's health issues. And so you put it that way, but always with respect. And your question about what do people say about imperialism, I started out by saying, I come in, I say, look, I can't answer your problems. You know, I live in New Jersey, I have a minivan, I go home, I have a nice house, and I'll go on to the other group of women. But what I can help you with is tell you what women are doing around the world, help you find out what it is you want to do, figure it out, use the wisdom in your own culture. You know, you tell me about this, you tell me what the problems are, you tell me how we can solve them. What I can do is sort of help you plan and help you make that. The things that I said earlier that are universal, the language that's universal, that I can teach them. But I'm not there to tell them what to do.
Roberta, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, when you were talking about that woman in Jordan and how she got the respect of the people who voted for her,
Yeah.
What happens when she gets into, and this might be my ignorance, but how does she, when she gets into the parliament, and there are people from the other part of the country that don't respect women and don't allow women to have that kind of power or authority? Like,
well, most of the provinces, you know, they have a quorum there, a quota, I'm sorry. And so women are in most of the provinces, there are women. What I've learned is that maybe this generation, they won't respect them. You know, I went with somebody to Azraq, and all of the men were standing there screaming at her. Somebody had diverted their water. And obviously you need water there. And they're screaming at her. And I realized this is the first woman that they've ever spoken to in leadership. And maybe they were yelling at her like she was somebody important. And maybe they won't make much movement with her, but their daughters is going to be different. They're going to see more women in power. And I think that will make the difference. In the case of Miasar, she was the chosen. And I think that her example is different. But also they did say to her that if she married and had a child, they wouldn't want her to be their member. So I wouldn't say that they were more progressive. I'd say she was really smart.
That's quite interesting because that is a straight up choice, public life or private life. And that story about the Ketonet Pasim, the coat of many colors, that was just an amazing illustration of, like you said, you're actually the Bible, we're still living in it in some spots in the world.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Meryl, for coming, and Steve.
Thank you.
We see you here too, and we're glad to have you guys. And thanks to everybody who joined us. And I speak for myself, but I'm sure I speak for everybody. Those were amazing stories. I learned a ton, and it's very, very important and inspiring work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.